Now, Labour Minister Thulas Nxesi insists there's no shortage of skilled truck drivers in the country. He reported back after inspections by his department as well as Home Affairs. Last week, members of the All Truck Drivers Forum blocked the N3 highway at Van Brienen's Pass in KZN. They accuse truck owners of employing foreign nationals without proper documents. Let's get more on this from Labour analyst Mr. Terry Bell. Mr. Bell, thank you very much for your time this morning. Now, just looking at this whole situation, it's an age-old problem. We've had truck drivers even last year blockading, but last week Friday, Minister Nxesi in particular was quoted as saying that the blockade is in fact economic sabotage, an affront to the entire nation and a staged crime. But fast forward to yesterday, we have the minister saying truck driving is not a scarce skill and issued a stern warning to employers who continue to hire foreign nationals in the freight industry. What do you make of the change in posture?
I think they finally realized they better do something about this in a hurry because it's been a terrible mess. We've had this in the past. We can go back more than 20 years, that famous, or is it notorious, Moy River Truck Plaza, which was blockaded there, and a new union emerged called Turning Wheel. Now, that had nothing to do with the xenophobic business of who was the nationality of which truck driver. It had to do with pay and conditions. And once again, this, I think, comes down to the same thing. There are unscrupulous employers who will, given the amount of unemployment that exists right throughout this region, and the fact that you do have people who have qualified properly as truly qualified truck drivers who are available. And the point is they will try to undercut the pay and conditions that our laws lay out for us. Now, all that has happened today, we have an announcement this week of a task team being set up, a ministerial task team involving the industry and the unions, etc. All they're trying to do is enforce or monitor and enforce the regulations and the laws that already exist. It's not a question of the nationality of drivers, it's a question of pay and conditions. And that's not, unfortunately, we've had driver against driver, worker against worker, where in fact it's some of the employers that are to blame and the Ministry of Labour that does not have enough inspectors, the judicial side of things that have not pursued people who have fraudulent certificates, etc. So the point is, it's quite tragic, and hopefully now this thing's not just going to be a flash in the pan. This task team will actually start to monitor properly and regulate properly an industry that is actually vital in this country, especially with the rundown of the rail system.
But when we look broadly, we have this tendency ever so often where it seems when workers protest, somehow the conversation is diluted or the focus shifts from the manner in which they protest, the timing of the protest, as opposed to the issues that they want to have addressed. Is this deliberate perhaps on the part of the employer or government at times to shift the focus and deal with the manner in which they have decided to voice their grievances?
In this case, where you actually have workers who were actually quite well organized at one stage, or sectors of them were, it's actually the failure here of the unions. They should be able to put the arguments forward and to make the arguments for the sorts of regulations and the number of labor inspectors, whatever, that are necessary to monitor and enforce existing regulations which are perfectly good. It's just not happened. So the unions have fallen down there. The employers are not going to help with this because as far as they're concerned, it's maximizing profit. So that's what it boils down to. And you can't blame them. That's what they're in the business for. And they're competing with one another. So it's a failure of unions and of the government agencies that should have been on top of things in terms of administering and monitoring the laws and the regulations that already exist and are perfectly good. Of course, right across the region, they'd have to apply, because we should not have people being employed, say, out of Zimbabwe or Malawi, being paid lower rates and then running transcontinental across to South Africa, etc. We should actually have an insistence on equal pay and equal benefits. That's the only way forward.
And then on the term, when we say economic sabotage, because that itself somehow birthed a type of debate even on social media, that the intention of a protest in most instances is basically just to raise awareness, You just bring attention to your issues, but then you do have instances where it can get out of hand. But they most honestly, in most cases, want to go and protest or do something that will get the attention of government, be it economic sabotage. But there most certainly must be some sort of a balance.
Well, the point is this happens all the time. I mean, the only reason I listen always to the road traffic reports, because that's where you hear there's a protest here, there's a protest there, they're burning tires on the road, etc. Yes, but the point is we need to have someone who enunciates what the protest is about. And this is where the union should have come in and actually made the arguments. And government has fallen down as well by not actually addressing these issues. It's something that is a matter of a lack of communication, but it can also be misused and it can be manipulated by people who have other agendas. That's where this whole aspect of economic sabotage may come in, because there'd be some people who might have a vested interest in, for example, disrupting certain parts of the economy, etc. But once again, other politicians or political voices can come in and blow that out of context in order to use their own agendas. It's a very complex issue, but the point is, if we had clarity of communication, and that should come primarily from organized drivers, and they're not properly organized, it's fairly anarchic, it's fairly chaotic. And unfortunately, unless this task team gets it together, I fear this will continue.
And just in closing, the relevance of unions today, because you're quite critical of them, saying they could have enunciated this or articulated it better, what the issues were on the ground. You've got workers that are vilified consistently if they want to take to the streets, and unions are nowhere to be found. Do you still think today they still actually can be the trusted voice of workers?
Well, I think perhaps there might have to be some new unions emerging, or a change. There's got to be some sort of change. Far too often, the unions have become far too bureaucratic. They've tended to rely not on their members and subscriptions, etc., but on their investment companies. They've become business unions. They've become businesses within themselves, which provide often a conveyor belt from the union into government, into ministerial roles, and then into business. I mean, it's ridiculous. That's not what unions are there or should be there for. So yes, the unions need to have a look at themselves, need to go back to basics, or alternatively, there may be other organizations that will grow out of the chaos. Who knows?
Hopefully they will take this moment to reflect, because ministers now have conceded that they actually do need to ensure that South Africans are hired, because it's not a critical skill to be driving, or at least there's no shortage of qualified drivers that are South African nationals. Thank you very much, Mr. Bell, for that. That was Labour analyst Terry Bell.